Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 2 of Forgotten Consoles. I'm Dan, and today we're going to be talking about the Sega Game Gear.
Ah yes, the Sega Game Gear. Who could forget Sega's attempt to compete with Nintendo in the handheld market? The interesting thing about the Game Gear was it actually was a portable version of the Sega Master System. That's right, this was one of the first consoles to actually give you that home console experience on the go. That probably explains why the console itself was pretty bulky. But even for that, that's pretty good size considering they'd shrunk down the Mega Drive into a handheld system. And of course, who could forget those crazy commercials back in the early 90s? Don't you guys miss those days when companies were able to poke fun at each other in their commercials? Of course, nowadays, with copyright laws, you can't even mention the other companies.
Hey, there's an easier way to get color. Get a Game Gear, the full-color portable with over 150 games.
Jeez, this commercial's crazy. And people thought the PSP squirrels were nuts.
But there's portable nut!
Anyway, like I was saying, the Sega Game Gear was Sega's attempt to compete with Nintendo in the handheld market. Of course, they were trying to advertise this as a handheld.
So as you can see, the Game Gear, even though it was labeled a handheld, it was quite big. I mean, even in comparison to the old NES top loader, as you can see, it's very close in size, not that much smaller. But even though it had a bulky size, it still was a very revolutionary handheld gaming console.
So here we have the Sega Game Gear. As you can see, it is pretty bulky. They often call the Game Boy the bricks of the handhelds, well, we can call this one a cinder block if anything. So there you have your volume switch, you have some inputs for multiplayer devices as well as a headphone jack, and also an AC plug, which you definitely would need considering this sucker takes up 6 AA batteries. There's 3 on the left side, and then there's also 3 on the right side. Unfortunately, the Game Gear suffered from terrible battery life, and 6 AA batteries drain within a couple hours. The Game Gear itself has a full 32 color display, which was very revolutionary for its time. And as you can see, it suffers from the similar problems as the Game Boy. If dust gets into the cartridge, it's hard to read sometimes. But it does work after you blow into it. Ah, that classic Sega. And now we're playing some Sonic Triple Trouble. This is one of the underrated games for the Game Gear, and I think it's one of the better Sonic games, at least for the early generation. On the right here, you can see there's a contrast slider, and you can see the screen going a little bit out of whack. That's usually what you want to do. If there's too much sunlight, you kind of adjust it so you can see better outside. And then also the volume at the top. And of course, like other games, this thing can crash. Although this is a very old console, but yes, it can crash. Here's a quick little size comparison of the games, too. As you can see, just like Nintendo, Sega also made little cases for their games. Back in the day, of course, dust gets into the games and it prevents you from playing. Makes it harder for the consoles to read them. So there's your Game Gear case. Very similar to the Game Boy. As you can see, the size isn't too bad considering the consoles are so vastly different in size. The games themselves are not too different. Sega also offered a variety of accessories in addition to all their games for their consoles. There was the classic Game Genie, as well as the wide gear, which is zoomed in the screen for you like a magnifying glass. There was even a TV tuner that allowed you to use your Game Gear as a way to watch TV on the go. Here's an interesting accessory that I actually own. It's called the Power Back. Basically, it was a big battery pack that attached to the back of the Game Gear and doubled or sometimes even tripled the lifespan of it without having to replace the AA batteries inside. This was definitely a godsend, and I remember using this very, very often and charging it frequently for long road trips. There you go. Although it made this thing probably twice as big as it originally was, but at least it lasted longer.
Overall, the Sega Game Gear was a pretty great handheld console for its time. It had a great library of games, and really gave that Sega Master System experience that you could take with you on the road. This is something that the Game Boy could never emulate with the NES until much later, and this was actually brought back in today's generation with PSP and DS, when they brought back classics and remade them for those handheld consoles. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I want to thank you all for the support you've given me, and thank you for the 30,000 views on Forgotten Console Episode 1. I can't believe how much you guys liked that video. Thanks for the criticism, the positive criticism, and thank you for everything. I will see you guys very soon. Thanks for watching.
Colors all around.